Alrighty, so it's time to do the last emotion index of the 2021 MLS season. And originally, I was going to do the emotion index right after when decision day is over, but I decided to wait until the playoff is over, wait until who would be crowned as champion of this 2021 MLS season to do this video. So, in terms of this emotion index, I'll look at how all 28 fan base feel about their team after this season. Some team might feel like we exceed expectation and won some silverware, which, by the way, when I mean silverware, I mean MLS Cup and Supporters Shield, which is why I'm going to put New England and NYCFC name immediately on them because they basically qualified this. And I know, obviously, down the line, people remember the team that win MLS Cup rather than the Supporters Shield winner, but because of the fact that the Revs broke the single season points record, that's going to be something that I think a lot of people will remember. And if there is another team that are looking to try to break that record, then definitely the Revs will be mentioned because they are right now the current holder of the most points ever a MLS team have recorded in the regular season. But I know again people will remember NYCFC winning MLS Cup and what a moment it is for them winning their first ever MLS Cup in their franchise history and finally ending that narrative of them not being able to even make it past the second round, all those playoff fatigue that they suffer in their short history. But the second category, we got the met expectation and had a good season. So these are the team that, we definitely meet our expectation. And overall, it was a decent season. The third tier is always the meh tier. Like, yeah, the season could be better, but, it could have been a lot worse than what some of these teams below us would deal with. Which, speaking of which, the tier below that is that, yeah, we did not meet expectation. And in fact, it's been a very underwhelming year, a year of underachieving, and I have a feeling there's a lot of team that is going to belong in this category. And then, of course, the last tier is basically the let's just forget about this season. Like, let's pretend this season didn't exist, and let's just move on to next year and hope that things are going to be better. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be the tier where a lot of these bottom feeder is going to be belong, because anytime when you finish bottom of your respective conference, yeah, you're probably just trying to brush off this season and move on into the next one. And as always, I of course will go alphabetical order, even though I already put two teams into that list because, like I said, they did win some silverware. And when I also mean silverware, I only mean those kind of two trophy, and so any other kind of rivalry related trophy like the Copa Tea House or the Cascadia Cup or even the Rocky Mountain Cup, that does not count as silver. I mean, it counts as silverware in terms of the rivalry's sake, but in terms of just actual silverware that people will definitely remember, yeah, the Supporters Shield and MLS Cup is definitely upon that. And I was also gonna do the team that wins the U.S. Open Cup into this list, but because we didn't have the U.S. Open Cup, that's why that is not the case. So we start off with Atlanta United, and for Atlanta, I would say they're right here. I think it's been a good season for Atlanta. I mean, I know the early playoff exit was definitely disappointing, and Atlanta fans thought that maybe this is finally the year that they are back to the team that they are. And for me, I feel like they're almost there. They're not really quite there. They're just yet to be back to the Atlanta team that we know that are the dominants of the Eastern Conference. But it's a good way to move into that step. Consider what happened in the previous year and how much of a decline this team gone through. And even during the beginning of the season under Gabriel Heinze, and how much of a decline that they would continue to face through. And eventually they decided to make that decision to fire him, bring in Gonzalo Pineda, and and now even talks about how they're going to be making some more moves and spending some money. I think Atlanta fans are going to be happy the fact that the future is going to be bright for them, and that you don't just go through a season that just went terribly wrong to immediately getting yourself back to MLS Cup contender. Like, very few team does that, and this is just kind of a baby step that Atlanta takes, where they're back to the stage where I think the Eastern Conference are going to once again take Atlanta seriously heading into next season. But now moving on to Austin FC, and this is a tough one because I'm going to say Austin is going to be here, and I'm not going to say that they just need to forget about this inaugural season. To me, I think this inaugural season has been kind of what you would expect as an expansion team. I mean, I know they haven't been like the expansion team like Nashville, Atlanta, or LAFC with the way of them making the playoffs, but this is also kind of just a reminder for everybody that when you're an expansion team, there's going to be some growing pains, and Austin definitely suffer a lot of those growing pains, especially in the beginning of the season where they was just simply not good enough in terms of scoring goals. But eventually they started to kind of figure it out, and that I thought in the second half of the season they really started to kind of got out of that stage where they kind of looked like an expansion team and finally started to be a respectable MLS team. And I think looking at some of the pieces that they had, and especially if they're going to add more pieces onto this team, especially on the attacking end, I think this team could be a team that I wouldn't say they're playoff ready yet, but they are definitely on the cusp of being a playoff contention. And I think Austin fans will be pretty happy about that, because like I said, and when you're an expansion team, you're going to have growing pains, and hopefully for this season for Austin, they can just say that this has been a pretty good expansion season or good season for an expansion kind of term, and let's just move on to the next year to hope to make to the next step. Now we got the Chicago Fire, and for the Fire, yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that they did not meet. I mean, I was thinking about maybe putting them over here because of how disastrous this season has been, but yeah, I mean, this team clearly did not meet their expectation, and the squad that they built just a couple of years ago clearly did not work out, and it seems like they're going to blow it up once again this off season, and maybe make some more signings to build a new core. And because of that, it's kind of like the Fire are rebuilding again, and it's got to be frustrating if you're a Fire fan seeing the team that a couple of, well, not a couple of years, but just a year and a half ago under new ownership, going back to Soldier Field and having a rebrand, and look like this is finally the time where the Fire could get back to the glory days. And no, it did not work out, and now they're basically tear it down and hope that the next try where they try to build a good core of a team will be enough for them to make it to the playoffs. And then we got FC Cincinnati next, and yeah, there's no doubt Cincinnati is going to be here. And while I'm at it, I might as well also put Houston in here too, because both of these teams are two teams that finish at the bottom of their respective conference. And I did mention the fact that when you're finished at the bottom of your respective conference, that you want to forget this season and want to move on to the next year. And in FC Cincinnati case, I mean, the pain continues, and you got to say that this year I think is probably the most frustrating year out of the first two seasons, or the first 3 seasons that they've been in the league, because this year there was some promise that maybe this is finally the year that Cincinnati might not be ready to just challenge for the playoffs, but maybe be finally a respectable team and not being the laughing stock of MLS. And yeah, no, they even went one step further into the rock bottom layer that they've been into the league. And this season I think this is also the lowest amount of points that they had, so they gone backwards in terms of how this team has gone, even though they try everything to spend money to try to finally build a respectable team. But fear not, Cincinnati fans, it is going to get better, and they do now have a GM. Oh god, I'm kind of blinking now that who is the new GM. He's the guy that come from the Philadelphia Union, but he's going to be definitely a guy that I think is going to try to fix this team and finally maybe make some smart signing to get this team to not be kind of the laughing stock of MLS. And the same case with the Houston Dynamo, getting Pat Onstad. I think that's going to be a good hiring of him, try to rebuild this Dynamo team. And speaking of rebuild, that's going to be something that I think they have to do heading into this upcoming season. Like there's just no way that I think these last couple of years, I've been talking about how they need to go for a rebuild with how their squad desperately needed, and they shouldn't just think about signing a bunch of filler gap player to hope to delay the inevitable. And it seems like they're going to have to do it now with the way that they're no longer a team that I think a lot of people would fear. And that it seems like they're also kind of still stuck in that MLS 1.0 era where you just simply cannot find the rough in the diamond and hope that it's going to work out and be a team that competes for the playoffs. But now moving on to the Colorado Rapids. Yeah, there's no doubt the Rapids exceed expectation. I mean, I know it definitely did not end it in the way that they were hoped to do, which is getting knocked out after just one playoff game. But the fact that this team were able to finish the top top seed as the Western Conference, and that I don't think anybody would have predicted that the Rapids would be the team that finished first in the West. In fact, if you were that person that predicted this, I want to know where you get your lottery ticket and where's that time machine that you had, because I mean, as good as the Rapids have had, and as good as the Rapids are, and the way that I really like some of the signings that they made, and it's kind of like this is one of those teams that is a hard-working team and also a team that makes some smart signing, and not to mention backed by a coach that, if it wasn't for them getting knocked out in the first round of the playoffs, I think Robin Fraser could have definitely won the coach of the year honor. Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise that this team of course were able to exceed the expectation and finish first for the first time in their club history. But like I said, I think Rapids fan, at the end of the day, I think they're going to be disappointed what happened in the playoffs, but take nothing away of what an incredible season this team has had. The best ever season that this team has ever had, with the most points that they ever got this season at 63 points. Now, moving on to the Columbus Crew, and yeah, I mean, for the Crew, it's been a rough season for the defending champion, and it's been a year that has been marred by underachieving, especially in the back line, and the numerous injuries issued that they've been having. And again, I know in the beginning of the last off season, a lot of people were praising that the Crew were making some good signing to really make the team look like 2 or 3 deep, but then unfortunately the injury kind of happened, and it seems like the injury, I think the MLS gods saw that, well, yeah, you're trying to build a very deep squad. We're gonna try to test this to see if you actually built a very deep squad or not. And it seems like I think after this season, maybe Columbus wasn't as deep as we thought it is, and that this is just a team that just never kind of got things going. Although I will give them credit that with the numerous injuries that they suffer, it's always going to be tough to trying to fight through that. But the other thing that I mentioned before, of the way that there's just so much underachieving that was going on this season. I mean, Lucas Arian was still decent this year, but what in the world happened to Luis Diaz, and how there was time where he basically wasn't even in the starting 11 with the amazing breakout season that he had last year. And the same goes with Pedro Santos and Jersey Zardes, although Zardes have spent a lot of time on the IR too. But let's also not to forget to mention the back line, where that back line, I just don't know what happened. Like, that back line was one of the most stable back line last season, and this year it just decided to basically completely collapse. And there's just so many games I've seen the Crew lost is because of individual defensive mistake, and that's just something that you never saw from this team when they won MLS Cup back in the 2020 MLS season. But now, moving on to DC United. So for DC, I mean, I want to put them here, but because they didn't make it to the playoffs, I'm going to put them here. It's been a season where again, if they made it to the playoffs, there's no doubt that they met expectation. In fact, I think if they would have made the playoffs, I could even put them here with the way that, coming into this season, I mean, there was so much unknown of how Hernan Losada is going to get his team that is still a team that was kind of full of guys that was part of the previous regime and the Ben Olsen there. How is he going to transform this team to a decent one? Well, not only the fact that he was able to transfer this team to be a playoff contender, but he absolutely transformed this team to be one of the funnest teams to watch. Like, this team literally gone from being one of the most boring team to watch last season to one of the best team and the most entertaining to watch last season. Now, unfortunately, just because you're being one of the most entertaining team to watch doesn't always mean it means it's a good thing. And DC last season, as I said, I love what not Almeida, but Losada is doing in terms of his style. And I think the reason why I say Almeida is because both of their styles are pretty similar, with that high octane kind of play, although Almeida tends to like to man mark a lot, and Losada tends to do something similar but kind of completely different, where he likes to high press a lot, and he wouldn't even stop high pressing even if they were losing big in the game. And in some way, it was almost like a risk or reward situation, and unfortunately throughout the season, that risk reward kind of caught up to this team. But still, take nothing away the fact that this has just been a very good season. And again, I know I'm gonna put them in the meh kind of season category. Could be better and could be worse, but in reality, I feel like maybe I could put them a little bit higher to say that they had a good season. And the only reason why I might not have put them there is because they didn't make it to the playoffs, and really they had nothing to show for, despite being an entertaining team to watch. But now moving on to FC Dallas, and for Dallas, yeah, they're gonna be here where, it's been a disappointing year for Dallas, and the team that, the only positive for Dallas coming out of this season, and their fans can basically use it as a bragging rights, is the fact that they won the inaugural Copa Tejas trophy over Houston and Austin, and that they can say that they are the best Texas team in MLS this season. Though, when you look at how teams from Texas have done this season, yeah, it's been bad. Like, all three of them finishing in the bottom half of the table, and Dallas was just a little bit better in terms of those two other Texans team that they have to face. But that being said, that's really kind of the only positive that this team has. And I've said before where I feel like eventually those bad signings that Dallas has made in these past couple of years is going to eventually catch them all. I mean, as good as they are in terms of being a team that creates some good talent out of the academy, and we saw it again with Ricardo Pepi, definitely a guy that's going to be sold off for a multi-million dollar to a team in Europe this offseason. With all those signings that they have made, and all those bad signings that just hasn't really pan out for this team, it eventually kind of catch up to them, and it did it in a way where they just never kind of got it going this year. But like I said, at least their fans are going to be happy the fact that they won the Copa TS, right? Yeah, right. But now moving on to Sporting KC, and for Sporting KC, this is tough because I'm gonna put them. I'm gonna put them here. I know SKC fans will say they're going to be here because of what happened in the playoffs and how this was really their chance. After what happened with the Seattle Sounders and how I thought coming out of the West, it was either between the Sounders or Sporting KC to make it out the West and reach MLS Cup. And after the Sounders got surprisingly knocked out by RSL in the first round, I thought that was really SKC Western Conference playoffs to lose, and the way that I thought they were now the clear favorites of moving on into the Western Conference final and even going to MLS Cup. And then they faced a team that of course defeated the Seattle Sounders, and they found out that RSL was a team that was destined to create some chaos and become that Cinderella team that we have not seen since the 2010 Colorado Rapids did, which went on to win MLS Cup. And then they of course got knocked out, and clearly a lot of their fans will say that once again they underachieved in the playoffs again, and once again more playoff fatality that this team has suffered, where I feel like besides the one MLS Cup that they won in 2013, you gotta say SKC fans has to be very frustrated with the way that it just feels like they just never able to get it done. And in fact, I would kind of maybe compare them to like the Green Bay Packers, and how how the Packers won that one Super Bowl back in 2010, and I could maybe even compare them to the New Orleans Saints of MLS, because both of those teams won that one Super Bowl, and they were in the playoffs repeatedly looking to try to get another one, and they just never able to do so. And it just seems like it's the same case with this team. It's like there's just so many times where they had the chances of reaching deep, and I thought this was probably the best opportunity that they had out of all those years of reaching the promised land, and they just choked it in that second round of the playoffs. But nevertheless, in terms of the regular season itself, no doubt they have met expectation. This was supposed to be a team that compete for the Western Conference crown, and although they didn't really quite to do so, they were still in a good spot where it's a decent season, and they were able to get good amount of points to really secure themselves in a good position to go on a playoff run. But like I said, again, I won't be surprised a lot of SKC fans would disagree with and say that they should belong in this category with how the playoffs, of course, ended for them. But now moving on to the Aoe Galaxy, and for the Galaxy, you know, I'm gonna say they're here, where it's kind of a meh season for the Galaxy. I mean, the could have been better will definitely be that they should have made it to the playoffs. Like, it's hard to imagine the fact that this team was above the playoff line all season, and they miss out on the final day. And that's going to be something that's going to haunt a lot of Galaxy fans, and especially that this is not the first time we've seen that this team miss out on the playoffs on the final day on decision day. But then there's also the could be worse part where, you know, this could be, I thought this was always going to be a season where the Galaxy was rebuilding, and the fact that, you know, I feel like, you know, that first half of the season with how amazing they were and being a team that was near the top part of the Western Conference, I thought that was something that they were kind of like almost over here, where they were just exceeding expectation. And that I know there's even some that say, well, looks like the Galaxy are finally back. No, you know, I think a lot of that was them just kind of punching above their weight, and then of course Chicharito just going completely crazy, decided to kind of show his prime form that he has, and just kind of score goals almost every single game. And then when he basically went down with an injury, and, you know, he eventually did come back and he was still able to score goals, but not at a rate when he of course was out of that injury. And I thought that also was a big point of this Galaxy season, and just kind of a turning point for this Galaxy team in this season, because, you know, they lost their goal scorer leader, and they just never recover from then. And in other words, it feels like this team was maybe built. The reason why they were kind of punching above their weight was because Chicharito was single-handedly carrying this team. And, you know, we've seen it before where when you have a team that only have one player that can carry the team, most of the time it doesn't always turns out to be very well. And unfortunately for the Galaxy, they just kind of went through a tailspin. And now heading into next season, this is where it gets difficult, where, you know, it's another disappointing season. They did not make it to the playoffs, and, you know, they definitely have some good pieces that they can build on in the future, but do they still need some more pieces, and do they need to maybe find another player that can take the pressure off of Chicharito in terms of the goal scoring form? And most importantly, do they need to find a new backline again? Which I think the answer is probably yes. I mean, you know, it feels like we say this every year. They just cannot, for whatever reason, this team cannot get themselves a good back line, and it's been one of the most mysterious thing I would say about this team. But at least, you know, with the Galaxy, I guess maybe the thing that they'll say is at least they weren't as bad as what LAFC was. And for LAFC, yeah, I mean, it is pretty clear that they did not meet expectation whatsoever, and it's been just such a disappointing year for a team that you know, had high expectation of being an MLS Cup contender. Now, I will say that they did had some injury problems throughout the season, and losing Carlos Vela for majority of the season is definitely going to hurt. And also, surprisingly, decided to sell off not sell off, but loan Diego Rossi off to Europe in the middle of the season, in the midst of a playoff run, was kind of a very strange decision. But nevertheless, I mean, when you look at this LAFC team, there's just so much talent in this team, especially on the attack. There's just no way in the world you would think this amount of talent, and they still somehow not able to find a way to make it to the playoffs. And now with Bob Bradley, of course, leaving this team, you just also wonder what's going to happen with this LAFC team in the future. And especially, I've also heard that they're looking to also sell off a couple more of their most important pieces of this court, and that they're going to potentially sell out west down to Palmeiras. Yeah, you know, we might be seeing LAFC suffering the same situation that Atlanta did just 2 years ago, where, remember when Atlanta was at the top of the world, and then they kind of got crippled when they started to sell some of their best talent. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing to do, because, you know, that's what MLS is all about. You're going to eventually have to sell off some of your best talent into Europe when the time is right. But unfortunately for LAFC, they kind of didn't do it in the right way, and that you just also wonder those money that they invest, you know, is that going to be enough to try to build themselves back to being a dominant force in the Western Conference? And we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that in the moving forward series when I do get to them. But now we move on to Inter Miami, and speaking of a disappointing team, that's Inter Miami has been this season. And again, I think it was pretty obvious that Inter Miami was going to be having an underwhelming season. Like, I saw it not just instantly with the hiring of Phil Neville, but just with the way that they built their team. It feels kind of weird with the way that they still decided to go with a guy that is Gonzalo Higuain, that had a horrible season in his first year in MLS. And although he definitely improved this season, he's still nowhere near the $7 million that they pay him. And not to mention, this year, I think what got worse for this Inter Miami team was not just the inconsistency, but also there's been times where they just go through a tailspin and have never recovered. I mean, this team went through 2 6-game losing streak. You're not going to make the playoffs if you go through 2 6-game losing streak. And all that, after all the money that they have spent, it's no wonder some of the fans for this Inter Miami team are kind of frustrated. And that, again, I am still shocked the fact that Phil Neville is still here. And I really think the only reason why Phil Neville is still here is because he has the connection of David Beckham. Because if he does not have that connection, I guarantee you the front office would basically dismiss him. And I know a lot of Inter Miami fans want Phil Neville to leave the team as soon as, I think, when they got on that first 6-game losing streak, and with the way that they were on point to finish even worse than they did last season. And last season, as I mentioned, was even a mess with this team too, because there's just no identity in this team, and it feels like it's kind of the same thing again, where there's just no identity to this team. It's a very weirdly kind of built of a squad, where I think when you look at this team, it might have worked out maybe like back in the early 2010s, where it seems like that was the era when if you get a big name European star player that might be aging badly, but if he can still perform, he's going to carry you to the promised land. That just does not work anymore in MLS, and it's just another example of showing MLS have really reached a 3.0 and maybe even a 4.0 stage now where it has really gone past the naysayers of the fact that this is indeed a retirement league. But now moving on to Minnesota United, and I did say that I'm going to put a lot of team in here, and the Loons is one of those ones, and I don't really need to explain too much because I've been talking about throughout this season. This team clearly underachieved with the talent that they have, and also so now heading into this off season, and also with the Reynoso situation, the future is looking bleak for this team. Like, the back line is aging badly. You don't know if some of these players that they signed from last off season that underachieved, will they maybe be a little bit better. I mean, if I'm an optimistic Loons fan, I'll say that they'll definitely be better than when they were in the first season, but there's just no guarantee that is going to be the case. And again, going back to the Reynoso situation, it's definitely looking bleak right now. It seems like if this situation does get even more bleaker, I think the team have no choice but to cut him. Like, you just simply cannot not have a guy that is right now currently in jail and expected that everything is going to be fine with that, and you eventually give him back once he's out of jail. And I'm not saying that the Loons are going to cut Reynoso right away. I think they're just going to let this play out and see how the investigation is going to be. But if it does go very badly, and that if they do find him to do the wrongdoings of what he's accused of doing, the Loons have no choice. They have to cut him, even though he is the heart and soul of this team. And it just gets even more messy to see how they're going to fix that and still be a competitive team next season. But now moving on to Montreal. So after talking about some of these teams that did not meet their expectation, Montreal, I think they're going to be here. And this is why I also probably should have put DC somewhere around up here to which, again, I can't change it anymore, because once I put their name onto these emotion index, I could maybe think about changing it, and maybe just pretend you didn't see what I said earlier of why DC is of course being over here. But yeah, for Montreal, no doubt that they exceed expectation, and in some way I also should have put them onto this chart, because they also won some silverware after winning the Canadian Championship. And even though I know the Canadian Championship is kind of an afterthought tournament, and with the way that it's either Toronto or Montreal and occasionally Vancouver winning the competition, it's still some silverware, and it's still a silverware that gets you to the CONCACAF Champions League, which Montreal able to get their chances to once again participate in that competition next season. But overall, when you look at the season that they had, and the way that a lot of people predicted that this team was going to be the worst team in the East, yeah, no. Wilfried Nancy was definitely proving people wrong, and they only miss out on the playoffs on the very final day. And if they would have made it to the playoffs and win against Orlando, this would have been one of the biggest story and one of the biggest feel good story that we've seen this season, because again, there was a lot of question coming into this team. I mean, they built a decent squad, but there was also a question of whether or not if it's decent enough to be a competitive team and a team that can compete for the playoffs. And it seems like that answer was yes. And if it wasn't for that loss that they suffered against Orlando, they would have made it to the playoffs for the first time. Well, actually not for the first time, because they were in the playoffs last season with them being in the expanded playoffs. But legitimately, if you don't include the expanded playoffs, I think this would be the first time that Montreal was able to make it to the promised land ever since 2016. Like that just tells you the fortune of this team, of how they have been a team that has not only been the forgotten team in MLS, but also a team that's just been so underwhelming, so underachieving with the way that they also have a very good passionate fan base. But now moving on into Nashville SC, and for Nashville, yeah, I think they definitely met expectation this season. I mean, I know they wish that they could have gone one step further, and if it wasn't for that poor penalty kick display that they shown against the Philadelphia Union, they would have been in the Eastern Conference Final and made even a step further than the incredible first season that they had in MLS. But nevertheless, I think Gary Smith, man, definitely meet expectation. I mean, I know there's also going to be those naysayers, the fact that they only got to being one of the best teams is because of the amount of draws that they have. Like they drew 18 times this season, which ties the record that they share with the Chicago Fire. But unlike that Chicago Fire team that did not make it to the playoffs, they did, and they just win enough games and also don't lose a lot of games. Like when you don't lose a lot of games, you're a decent team. And again, technically they didn't lose that game against the Philadelphia Union in the playoff of two. So I guess maybe that's another saying that they could go, at least they did not lose their final game. But I think overall it's been a great season for them, a huge improvement once again, which is something that we've seen before, where expansion team, when they make it to their first year in the playoffs, we've seen that they do make a step up. But now it's also going to be interesting to see whether or not if Nashville can sustain that promise, because so far those two teams, or in this case those two teams I mentioned that make it to the playoffs in their first year and basically added an exclamation mark in the second year. Yeah, in the third year it was, well, I would say maybe in the fourth year it was a little bit different for Orlando United, because that's when they kind of collapsed. But in the case of LAFC, we saw how that third year went and how much of a decline that they have. And let's just hope for Nashville that is not going to be the case. They're going to continue to be sustaining themselves to be a very, very, very competitive team now in the Western Conference. And who knows, maybe they could be finally that team to also end the dominance of the Cascadia team that is the Seattle Sounders and the Portland Timbers. And maybe they can finally get through that next step of potentially reaching the third round or even into MLS Cup. I mean, if there's one thing that we know is that, as much as there are some of these teams that are just stake bit in the playoffs, we see what NYCFC have done this season. I'm not saying Nashville is that stake bit yet, because it's only been 2 playoff appearances that they have. They'll need to get maybe a couple more of them losing early in the playoffs to consider themselves at NYCFC, or even some of these playoff teams, or some of these teams that regularly make the playoffs but exit early in the playoffs as being a snake bit team. But we've seen before, even the most snake bit team can still win on to go on a deep run, and I can definitely see this Nashville team do so, especially if they can keep playing the way that they had and maybe finally found that attackers. Well, they technically have found it with Hani Mukhtar, but if they can find another player that could be a difference maker, this team can really seriously make noise heading into next season. But now moving on to the New York Red Bulls. So for the Red Bulls, I know Red Bulls fan will say that they should be here because after seeing their rival winning an MLS Cup and how embarrassing that is, the fact that they've been in the league ever since its inception and they never won the trophy, and that their hated rival literally win it just 6 years coming into the league. But in reality, they are going to be right here where, yes, I think they met expectation where they were able to sustain their playoff streak and literally did it on the very final day. And that, for a team that was supposed to be rebuilding this season and under the stewardship of Gerhard Struver, a lot of people didn't think that they were going to make the playoffs. And especially down the stretch, I think Red Bulls fans were giving up the fact that they were not going to make it to the playoffs and that they just have to look forward to next year. But a miraculous run to the end of the season gets them to the playoffs. And if it wasn't for just an incredible golazo that Jacob Glesnes scored in that playoffs, who knows? They could go into that PK shootout, and if there's one thing we know about PK shootout, it's a complete crapshoot, and it's almost like a flip of a coin. And if they were on the right side of the coin, they would have probably moved on into the next round, and we'll never know what can happen to this Red Bulls team. Now, moving on to Orlando City, and for Orlando, I guess they're going to be right here where I know I could have easily put them here where they definitely did not meet the expectation. It's been a very underwhelming year for Orlando where, yes, they made it to the playoffs again, but there's no doubt that I think Orlando City fans will feel like they did kind of take a little bit of a step back with the way how they performed this season, where there's been just times where not only they've been very inconsistent, but they just aren't able to feel a team that basically could be better than last year. If you compare it to this team than to the team that was Orlando City last season, that team last season was much better, and also a lot of that has to do with Orlando, also one of those teams that was kind of snake bit with the injury bug a little, but they had a lot of players that were missing due to injury, but it's also due to the fact that they were also a team that they had a lot of talent on the attack, but they just feel like they never kind of figure out, and a lot of those attacking pieces was kind of underachieving a little bit. Daryl DK, when he did return to Orlando City, we thought that he would absolutely turn things up, and he did kind of show in that game against the Quakes, his first game back with Orlando from his loan, but he just never shown that, and his stock has really plummeted because of that, and also the injuries that he's been dealing with. Nani was decent for at least the first half of the season, but then his magic started to kind of wear off, and it just gets to a point where he was basically more of a super sub. After that, there was really no other option on the attack, and it's just a team that for most games they were just hoping that they can score that one goal to move on and get all 3 points. And while Nashville has done very successful during that, Orlando hasn't really had as much success in terms of it, but it's also due to the fact that, again, they were a very inconsistent team, and also a team that just cannot able to beat against good opponent. And I said it before, when you cannot beat against some of the best team in the East, they were always going to be in trouble in the playoffs, and surprise, surprise, they were in trouble in the playoffs when they played against Nashville and got knocked out in that first round. But now moving on to the Philadelphia Union. Yeah, for the Union, I would say they're probably right here where I think they definitely exceed expectation in a way that they did something that no Union team has ever done, which is getting to the Eastern Conference Final. And again, if it wasn't for I don't want to make speculation, but I think a lot of people would agree that if it wasn't for the COVID outbreak that they had coming into that game against NYCFC, they would have had a big opportunity to move on to MLS Cup for the first time in their franchise history. But again, as much as people, of course, a lot of people have said that, we never know. It was also a game where I remember that was also a game where the Union had that 1-1. If it wasn't for them just kind of conceding on the other end immediately, and it just kind of feels like that was really a turning point of the game. Consider it has to be a crushing blow for a lot of these young players on that team where you go up 1-0 and you feel like things are gonna be, you might have pulled off a miracle, and then you can see the other end and it could be a devastating mental blow for this team. But overall, I think the other issue that the Union has had in the playoffs is the fact that they play so many games in extra time, and that was eventually going to kind of wear them down. But despite like that, I think Union fans will say that overall this was a very successful season. And in some way, the other thing that exceeded expectation with this Union team is that they were the last team standing in the CONCACAF Champions League. That this was a team that gone deeper than any other MLS team to in that competition, which at the beginning of that competition I didn't think that was going to be the case. But the fact that they were able to do so and almost knock off Club America if it wasn't for some of their bad finishing that they had in that second leg, I mean, who knows? They could have also been in a final of the CONCACAF Champions League too. So overall, I think it's been a successful season for the Union, even though if it didn't end it the way that they were hoped for because of an unfortunate outbreak that they had within their team. But now moving on to RSL, or actually no, we got to move on to the Portland Timbers, who were the other finalists. And for the Timbers, yeah, I think they definitely exceed expectation in a way where, I mean, I guess in the regular season, you would say that they're kind of maybe like right around here where they really didn't kind of exceed expectation with the way that I thought this was supposed to be a team that could compete with the best team in the Western Conference. But once they got into playoff mode, boy oh boy, they really started to show like that playoff team that we know that this team could do. And there's just something about this Timbers team and something about Giovanni Savarese. Whenever playoff time is happening, this team knows how to get it done. And the fact that they were also able to get it done without the likes of Sebastian Blanco and Darnell Spuria, especially in that Western Conference final, there's got to be a lot of applause in terms of that. Now, that being said, when you lose an MLS Cup final, I know it's never a good feeling, and I know their fans will immediately say that let's forget about this year with the way that they lost MLS Cup. But I also thought that was an MLS Cup where, again, they only lose it in a PK shootout, and I always say that when you lose it in a PK shootout, there's really nothing to feel ashamed of it. I mean, it's a PK show. It's just kind of the flip of a coin, and unfortunately, the Timbers just didn't end up on the right side of the coin to grab their second MLS Cup in their franchise history. But now moving on to RSL, and you better believe RSL is here, and there really isn't a lot of explanation I need to talk about RSL, why they exceed expectation, because nobody thought that this team was going to make it to the Western Conference final. Heck, nobody thought that this team was going to make it to the playoffs. And yes, I know people will immediately talk about that controversial call again, but put that aside, they deserve to make it to the playoffs, especially of how hard that they fought and all that adversity that they have to face. And I think RSL fans has to be very happy of how their team performed. And even though their Cinderella run eventually did come to an end in the Western Conference final, this is something we don't usually see as much as we have used to. And the fact that again, what a ride it has been if you're an RSL fan, seeing your team gone as deep as they did when nobody believed that you could do so. I mean, that's got to be such an honor to do so, and in many ways they definitely exceed every expectation that we thought they were going to be this season. But now moving on to the San Jose Earthquakes. So for one team that exceeded expectation to another team that did not meet expectation, and that of course is the Quakes. I mean, again, this felt like it was another groundhog season for the Quakes, where how I talked about in the beginning of the season, how as much as I know there's a lot of hope that this is finally the year that they can make that next step after making the playoffs last season, yeah, they gone backwards this season. I mean, I will also say that this doesn't feel as bad as what it was in 2018, because I think in 2018, with that was the year I talked about how there was so much hope that they can make the next step, and they just completely flat out flop and decide to not show up for the entire season. At least this year they did win some games and had some hope that they could, of course, make it to the playoffs. But at the end of the day, this team was just too inconsistent. I mean, it was just an up and down kind of team, which is kind of what the Almeida experience is all about. But that's also the issue with the Almeida experience. Like, when you have a season where you're up and down like that, you're not gonna go very far from the play to the playoffs. And it's unfortunate that down the stretch they just could not get the job done. And now heading into next year, again, that's why I always be very pessimistic about this team, even if things are going to change, because I've seen this many times before. And I guess maybe the only optimistic thing I would say about the Quakes is, with Chris Leach, I trusted him to really guide this team, and that he's already proven himself, making some good move by bringing Jeremy Ebolosi into this team. And I think Ebolosi is going to definitely improve and be a very, very good difference maker in that attack. But that might be kind of the only optimistic point of the fact that I'm just ready for this team to somehow disappoint me again next year. But we shall see. We'll see whether or not things are going to turn out different. And I did say before that eventually narratives is eventually going to come to an end, and I'm just hoping next season might be finally the year that the narrative of the Quakes being a team that always destroy the hopes of their fans is also going to come to an end. But now moving on to the Seattle Sounders, and this is going to be a tough one too, because I know Sounders fans will say that they definitely did not meet their expectation of what happened in the playoffs. But overall, I would say that, I think it's still a good season for this team. I think, yes, the playoffs was unfortunate, and that was really one of the first time where we see that this team just could not get it done in the end. But it happens. Like, some of the best team in the league, you're going to have games like this where it just feels like nothing is going right for them, and you just could not put the ball into the back of the net. And that was the case in that game against RSL. And also, not to mention the fact that they definitely faced some injury issue down the stretch. I mean, they done so well in terms of battling injuries throughout the season, but the old saying go, you can only do so much until it finally crippled this team. And I feel like it definitely crippled this team as we were heading into the playoffs. And not to mention, they also were not in a very good run heading into the playoffs too. Like, when you head to the playoffs, Cole, you're going to definitely suffer, and the Sounders definitely did suffer from that. But again, overall, when you look at the season that they had, it's an incredible season, and that I think this team is definitely going to be back, even though I know a lot of Sounders fans will just kind of point out that maybe started to panic again, that this is kind of the end, and the fact that, this one playoff bad run means that we'll start to show decline. No. I mean, if you think that this team at times can show any kind of decline, they always will find a way to prove you wrong. And in some way, they're kind of the opposite of what I said about the Quakes. Like, the Quakes always give false hope to their fans. That's the opposite with the Seattle Sounders. They give hopes to their fans, even though when their fans feel like it's false hope. And I truly believe this team is going to be back next year, and this team will be a team that will once again compete for MLS Cup and potentially continue that streak of a Cascadia team making it to MLS Cup out of the West. But now moving on to Toronto FC, and for TFC, yeah, they're going to be right here where, it's not just the fact that they did not meet expectation, but I'm pretty sure every TFC fans will want to forget this season of how much of a disaster of a year from the short reign of Chris Armas, just really completely destroying this team to the ground, to basically them unable to find kind of a permanent head coach, and just gone through an entire year full of mediocrity, and all their players kind of suffering the injury bug. And when you add all that together, it's not a surprise that TFC has really fallen from their glories they had in the past couple of years. But I have no doubt that things are going to be better. Now Bob Bradley is going to be coming into this team. I know if you of course give him money and give him good players to work with, he's going to guide a team to the promised land. So I think for TFC, they're going to be definitely bounce back. I mean, again, this was a rough year for them, but we've seen before where they had rough years before. Remember back in 2018 when they had that rough year after they looked like they were going to win the CONCACAF Champions League, and then they didn't, and then just basically punt the entire part of the season. And then the very next year, they went to MLS Cup again. And I'm not saying it's going to happen again in 2022, but I think this team is going to be much better, especially with the talent that they had and the money and the resource that they're going to spend the offseason to make sure that last season is something that will never happen again in terms of sustaining the long-term success of this team. And then finally, moving on to the last team, which is the Vancouver Whitecaps. Yeah, they are a team that no doubt exceed expectation. I mean, the incredible story of Vanni Sertini guiding his team to the playoffs just kind of out of nowhere. And really, in the playoffs, I know it was a disappointing end to what could have been a Cinderella's run to the playoffs for an MLS team. But I think one of the big reason why it kind of hurt them is because they had a long layoff, and this was clearly a team that was built off of confidence. And it's also going to be interesting to see heading into next season, now that they proved that they can be a playoff team. Can they maybe take that next step? Can this group of players, which I feel like the Whitecaps have started to finally gone out of that cloud of rebuild that they've been going through for the past couple of years, and finally be a contender? Can that finally happen this season? I think, and I truly believe that they can do so. I think Vanni Sertini is exactly the head coach that Vancouver has been looking for a very, very long time. And not to mention, when you look at their team, their the defense has been much more better compared to previous year. And then on the attacking end, I mean, talk about Brian White, of how much the Red Bulls, I'm pretty sure they're regretting of letting him go for such a cheap amount of money with the form that he was in down the stretch. And then, of course, let's not forget to mention about Ryan Gaul, who could have won the comeback, or well, not the comeback player of the year, but the newcomer of the year. Got the award mixed up there for a second because of his incredible display that he has with the Whitecaps. If he can continue to show that heading into the second year, this team will be back in the playoffs and are looking to build on what they had in the previous year. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the last emotion index of the season. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all of these 28 teams? And if you're a fan of one of these teams, let me know in the comments, do you agree of where I put them in the rankings? Did I put them a little bit too high, or did I put them a little bit too low? But let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.